We're continuing our read of Clive Barker's A to Z of Horror. And we are at X is for Exploitation. So some exploitation titles. Bookmark. It says Hot and Steamy Books Rule. It's from Fort Witch. Love her. X is for Exploitation. Horror has always delighted in its maverick status. The term low budget might have been invented for the horror movie, and the same fevered imaginations that dream up these celluloid fantasies can be equally creative in getting them seen. The period of the 50s and 60s was a golden age for me, says director Joe Dante. I was a kid in the 50s and a teenager in the 60s when movies were still a little reticent about showing really horrible visuals. I remember going to see The Crawling Eye, 1958. And there was a scene where all the characters were looking down at some dissolving piece of flesh or something. I remember all the kids chanting, "Show us, show us, show us." And then they would show it and everyone went, "Ooh." I thought, yeah, this is what movies are all about. It was a more innocent era, and I think of Roger Corman and William Castle and the exploitation, very low budget, interactive kind of movies that had gimmicks, movies that had tricks, movies that kids would go to and expect the unexpected. Director John Landis remembers that the William Castle product in Roger Corman's Edgar Allan Poe's film scared the shit out of me. I remember seeing Pit and the Pendulum, 1961, with Vincent Price and wanting to leave. When I first started out, says director Dennis Steckler, I was trying to figure out some sort of gimmick to get the movie in the theater, so I came up with the longest title in the world, The Incredibly Strange Creatures Who Stopped Living and Became Mixed Up Zombies, 1963. A title to a movie is everything, agrees cinematographer turned director Ted V. Mickles, whose own films include The Astro Zombies, 1968, and Blood Orgy of the She-Devils, 1973. Without a title, don't make the movie. For John Landis, classic titles include I Was a Teenage Whatever, Frankenstein, Werewolf, and How to Make a Monster. That was very important with the horror movie. If you want to get the teenagers, use a teenage thing. And in the 1950s, television was keeping people home, so that what they had to do was figure out how to get these young people away from that tube. One of Joe Dante's favorite films is Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, 1958. You can't really get a much more absurd title, but in my estimation, it is a nearly perfect film. Movie posters contain so much of what I like. They're lurid, they're accessible, they can be great fun, they can be witty. I love hook lines, Clive Barker. And we've got Bath Time in the Tingler, and then a few movie posters. There was a real sense of fun going to the movies in the 50s, continues Dante, and it was partly because of the rather flamboyant way in which the pictures were advertised. Movie advertisement has always been a lot less sophisticated than the actual contents of movies. There was a time when if you didn't play a trailer, says Mickles, you wouldn't book the film, you couldn't play it. To sell his 1971 movie, The Corpse Grinders, Mickles came up with the concept, cat food made from human ingredients for cats who like people. It's that simple. I used to make trailers for Roger Corman, says Dante, and even then I think the art of trailer making has pretty much died. The wipes and the lettering and the hyperbole and the promises and the swearing that you've never seen anything as good as this. Steckler agrees. Many times people would say the trailer's 10 times better than the movie. We went to the lengths of actually falsifying the plots and doing all kinds of tricks that really weren't very kosher, continues Dante. But they would allow the pictures to be successful for the 3 or 4 days that it was booked. No matter what movie you make, says Mickles, if you don't promote it and don't tell the world about it, nobody's going to see it and you're not going to sell it. I think hucksterism is part and parcel of the way these pictures were sold, Dante agrees. If you just look at a press book from a popular movie in the 1950s, many pages, many different designs, many different ad lines, many different approaches depending on who the exhibitor felt the audience was. Now you get one ad for one movie. Unfortunately, that ad, like the movie, has to appeal to the most number of people. A number of cinemas went out of their way to promote the Corpse Grinders, as Mickles explains. In some of the theaters, the managers actually constructed a makeshift corpse grinding machine that caused a lot of attention. Promoting the Worm Eaters, 1977, was one of the more real fun things we've ever done, he continues. We had to steal the show. We had no budget to do it with, so I told star Herb Robbins that he would eat a worm for the press, I would eat a worm for the press, and we got news coverage we couldn't buy at any price. Gimmicks. I love gimmicks. The undisputed king of the gimmicks was producer William Castle, 1914 to 1977, who raised movie showmanship to a new level. Born William Schloss, he started out directing Hollywood B movies, but in the late 50s and 60s, he produced and directed a string of successes, which he promoted with cheap yet effective schemes and introduced with his ever-present cigar in the Alfred Hitchcock manner. He ended up producing such films as Rosemary's Baby, 1968, and his 1976 autobiography was aptly entitled, "Step Right Up, I'm Gonna Scare the Pants Off America." I think it was William Castle who came up with a great gimmick, says Ray Steckler, recalling Castle's 1957 movie Macabre. He was the first one to take out an insurance policy with Lloyd's of London for $1,000 if you died of fright. And then we have an aside here. Showmanship is an integral part of the entertainment world. You must have it. Of course, as Mr. Shakespeare said, the play is the thing. You must have a story and a fine cast, but you have to sell and merchandise a picture, and this is why I started my gimmicks. I had no cast and no money, so I had to do something else to compel audiences to come into the theater. Not having stars or a high budget, I had to do something different, and I became, in effect, the king of gimmicks. I know I'm a darn good showman. Nobody could top my gimmicks. William Castle. And there's a picture of the she creature and William Castle. John Landis also fondly remembers Castle's house on Haunted Hill, 1959, where they had something called a Murgo, and it was the tackiest thing. It was a paper skeleton on a string that came out over the audience. Mine was one of the few theaters that actually had a real skeleton, says Joe Dante. Came down on the corner of the screen when Vincent Price brought out his skeleton on the screen. There were apparently very few theaters in which the skeleton survived because once kids found out what was happening, they would come back with slingshots and popcorn boxes. That was a pretty expensive gimmick. For 13 Ghosts, 1960, Castle came up with the idea of Illusion O, which involved a set of red and blue transparent plastic squares. I remember 3D Ghosts, Dante continues, where you had ghost viewers. The idea was that when the people were on the screen saw the ghost, you could put on the ghost viewer. Dennis Steckler starred in many of his own films under the name Cash Flag and soon earned his own following. People said, Cash, he's the guy with the weird eyes, and he's the guy with the hood, or whatever. So all of a sudden, people started knowing Cash, and they said, okay, Cash Flag means this type of film. To promote his own film, Steckler made masks of himself as Cash Flag. We sent people out looking like me, he explains. When they ran down into the audience, you would see this illuminated figure coming at you. People would shoot you with pellet guns right in the theater. I had to duck for my life, but it was fun. But after the pellet guns started hitting me a little bit, I said it was time to retire. It's wonderful when it's so silly, says Landis. The gimmick of William Castle's film, The Tingler, 1959, was to convince the audience that fear is a tangible beast. So when you are frightened, this thing grows at the base of your spine. It gets larger and larger and will kill you unless you scream. There's a wonderful moment when Vincent Price comes on camera and says, the Tingler's loose in the theater. For God's sake, scream, scream for your lives. He wired every other seat with war surplus buzzers, exclaims Dante, whose movie Matinee, 1993, paid tribute to Castle's showmanship and turned them into various points of the movie. So at certain first-run houses that had wired the seats, laughs Landis, every fifth seat got zapped. My favorite, though, was Mr. Sardonicus, 1961. Mr. Sardonicus, recalls Dante, was the first interactive motion picture where, as you came into the theaters, you were given those fluorescent cards. There was a punishment poll at the end of Mr. Sardonicus, and William Castle would come out to the screen and say to the audience, at a certain point in the picture, you will vote thumbs up or thumbs down, depending on whether they felt the villain had been suitably punished. Castle would count the cards, and then he'd say that Mr. Sardonicus was going to die. And we were morons, Landis adds. We were all going thumbs down, and sure enough, he died. Of course, there was only one ending, laughs Dante, and only one piece of film with William Castle counting. They always ran the same footage at the end. There are many great, wonderful horror films that were made in the 50s and 60s, says John Landis. The vast majority, though, are direct, and there's a great enjoyment in that, too. Joe Dante agrees that a film does not always have to be good to be enjoyable. There are two different styles of monsters. One was bargain basement, which usually found in American International Pictures, where a guy named Paul Bledsoe used to build them in his garage. And then there would be recycled monsters like the She Creature, 1956, which is then used again in a movie called Voodoo Woman, 1957, where they simply took the same suit and put a stupid wig on it. One of the nice things about horror movies is that they were wonderful proving grounds for people who wanted to make their early pictures. There was an adventurous spirit in monster making with them, though, of course, now it's all computers and technology. When you look back at movies, you thought were real and when you were a kid, you're kind of amazed at how you forgave so many things that were very obvious, how much you wanted to be drawn into the fantasy and how much you wanted to believe it. Go back and do my sides. Okay, quote, William Castle, producer, director, showman of, among others, House on Haunted Hill, and I Saw What You Did, proved that there was case for the fun horror movie. His output was distinguished by the loving use of cheap shocks, half-satirical, spooky settings, and a plethora of publicity stunts. Kim Newman. Castle was the king of the gimmicks. He originated the $1,000 fright insurance policy, for instance. If you drop dead during the film, your heirs got the money. Then there was the great nurse on duty at all performances gimmick. There was the you must have your own blood pressure taken in the lobby before viewing this horrifying film gimmick. That one was used as part of the House on Haunted Hill promo and all sorts of other gimmicks. Stephen King. And then we've got teenage werewolf, teenage Frankenstein. Oh. When you play homicidal at your theater, you have the greatest exploitation promotion to get you away to record business, the fright break. Occurring exactly 8.5 minutes before the end of the picture, this sensational interlude will afford patrons who are too timid to take the climax an opportunity of leaving the theater. Homicidal campaign book. Matinee, USA, 1993, Joe Dante with John Goodman, Kathleen Moriarty, Simon Fenton, Omri Katz, Kelly Martin, Lisa Jacob, Renfield, Universal Color. Ex-Castle Frankenstein contributor, Dante's affectionate coming-of-age comedy set during the Saturday matinee in Florida at the time of the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. With Goodman as William Castle-like showman, Lawrence Woodsley premiering as his film within a film, Mant, a parody of the monster movies of the 1950s, with his hero slowly transforming into a giant ant. With cameos by genre veterans, Jesse White, Dick Miller, John Sayles, Kevin McCarthy, William Shepard, Robert Cornwaith, and Luke Halpin. And then there's selected works of William Castle and Mr. Sardonicus. He had a great sense of showmanship and he was fun to work with. He had wonderful, wild ideas. I liked Bill. He was a very nice man. Vincent Price. Please don't reveal the ending of Homicidal or your friends will kill you. If they don't, I will. Signed, William Castle. And there's a card here for House on Haunted Hill. Horror is a genre. It's about what really scares you, continues Dante. There was a wonderful catch line I remember for Wes Craven's Last House on the Left, 1972, where it said in big, bold type, to avoid fainting, keep repeating, it's only a movie. It's only a movie. I mean, it's great. What a way to sell. In fact, William Castle had already used the same line 8 years earlier to sell his film Straight Jacket, 1964. Once again, horror's consummate showman had got there first. And that was X for Xploitation. Next week is Y for Year Zero. So thank you for reading with me, and I will see you next week. Bye.